The condensation on the inside of the glass was wrong. It was late October, the air outside sharp and biting, but the historic Victorian greenhouse was sweating from the inside out, the humidity clinging to the antique panes in thick, uneven streaks. I stood in the mud, the cold seeping through the soles of my work boots, staring at the brass temperature gauge mounted on the exterior brickwork. It read 85 degrees. The automated ventilation louvers were jammed, the copper linkage seized by rust and sheer neglect. Inside that glass structure were propagation tables holding 4 generations of heirloom orchids, and if the temperature spiked another 5 degrees, their cellular walls would begin to break down. I wiped the rain from my forehead with the back of a canvas-gloved hand and reached for my tool belt. I pulled out a can of penetrating oil and a heavy-duty pair of Nipex Cobra pliers, stepping under the dripping overhang of the glass roof. The soil beneath my boots was saturated, giving way with a soft, sucking sound. I didn't work here. I just came by to check on the property because the guy who usually did, my best friend, who was currently 6,000 miles away on a naval deployment, had asked me to. But the real reason I was standing in the freezing rain, fighting a rusted vent crank, was the woman who owned the land. I worked the pliers around the hexagonal brass nut, feeling the teeth bite into the soft metal. I applied steady, even pressure, leaning my weight into the handle. The rust popped with a sharp crack, the linkage dropping open. A rush of trapped, damp heat immediately vented out into the cold afternoon air, smelling of wet earth, peat moss, and blooming jasmine. The temperature gauge needle visibly shuddered, then began a slow, steady descent. I exhaled, my breath pluming in the chill air, and wiped the oil from my gloves. The heavy latch of the greenhouse door clicked, the sound loud against the rhythm of the rain. I turned, the pliers still gripped in my right hand. Aurora stepped into the doorway. The breath I had just taken stalled somewhere in my chest, a sudden weight settling directly over my ribs. She was wearing a cream-colored silk wrap dress, the edges trimmed in a soft peach that caught the muted afternoon light. The fabric draped against her, completely unsuited for the damp chill of the garden, yet she looked like she owned the very ground she stood on. Her blonde hair fell in loose, natural curls around her shoulders, catching the moisture in the air. I stood there in my olive-green work shirt, my boots caked in a half-inch of mud, holding a pair of greasy pliers. The contrast between us had never felt sharper. I was the rough-around-the-edges kid who used to track dirt into her kitchen 10 years ago. She was elegance, refinement, and a quiet strength that always made me feel like I needed to stand a little taller just to share the same airspace. Her hand, pale and steady, rested on the weathered brass handle of the greenhouse door. She looked at the open ventilation louvers, then at the oil can hanging from my belt, and finally at my face. The tension around her eyes, a tightness I had noticed building over the last 3 months, softened just a fraction. She turned slowly and smiled, the expression tired but impossibly warm. "You can be honest with me, Jackson." Her voice was soft, carrying over the sound of the rain. "How bad is it? And I don't mean the vents." I swallowed the sudden dryness in my throat. I slipped the pliers back into their leather sheath, the physical motion grounding me. "The vents were just stuck. A little oil and leverage and they'll hold." I stepped closer, stopping right at the edge of the stone threshold, keeping a careful, respectful distance. "But the surveyor stakes on the east ridge. Sterling moved them." The warmth in her eyes flickered, replaced instantly by a defensive steel. Vance Sterling was the developer who had purchased the adjacent acreage, a man who saw heritage oaks as lumber and historic property lines as mere suggestions. For weeks he had been sending legal threats, claiming Aurora's greenhouse and the 80-year-old retaining wall behind it encroached on his parcel. "He moved them," she repeated, her fingers tightening around the door handle. "The orange stakes by the old cedar?" 3 feet inward, I confirmed, keeping my voice low, stripping the emotion from it to present pure facts. I was checking the drip line of the oak when I saw the disturbed soil. He's trying to establish a new boundary before the county inspector comes out next week. If he claims that 3 feet, the retaining wall falls under his jurisdiction, he'll bulldoze it to make room for his access road, and this greenhouse will slide down the embankment by spring. Aurora closed her eyes. A subtle tremor ran through her shoulders, a brief surrender to the overwhelming weight of the legal and financial pressure Sterling had been burying her under. I hated that tremor. I hated the man causing it. I kept my hands at my sides. I didn't reach out. I didn't offer empty, comforting words. Instead, I gave her a solution. I brought my transit level and the original plat maps from the county archive, I said, my voice steady. I cross-referenced the coordinates with the root collar of the heritage oak. That tree has been there for 120 years. It's a recognized landmark on the original deed. Sterling can move wooden stakes all he wants, but he can't move a 4-foot thick root system. I'm going to map the subsoil structure and draft an arborist impact report. He touches that wall. He violates state environmental protection laws. Aurora opened her eyes. The panic that had been threatening to surface was gone, replaced by a profound, sudden silence. She looked at me, really looked at me, as if seeing past the dirt and the work clothes to the expertise I had spent the last decade building. "You did all that?" she asked quietly. "Just now?" "I'm doing the soil analysis right now," I corrected gently. "I just needed to fix your vents first so the orchids didn't boil." She let out a shaky exhale. It wasn't a sigh of defeat. It was the sound of a heavy burden being momentarily set down. She stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come inside, Jackson. You're freezing." I looked down at my boots. "I'm covered in mud, Aurora. I'll ruin the floors." "It's a greenhouse," she countered, her tone leaving no room for argument. "There is dirt everywhere. Come in." I stepped over the threshold. The transition from the biting wind to the humid, earth-scented sanctuary of the greenhouse was immediate. I stayed near the door, acutely aware of my own bulk in the delicate space. Aurora moved to a small potting bench and picked up a thermos, pouring a cup of dark, steaming coffee into a ceramic mug. She walked back to me and held it out. I took the mug. Our fingers didn't brush, but the radiant heat from the ceramic transferred instantly to my cold hands. The tremor in my knuckles stopped. The chaotic noise of the rain drumming on the glass seemed to fade into the background, leaving a sudden, settling stillness in my chest. It felt like walking out of a storm and into a quiet, heavily fortified room. "He sent another letter today," she said, wrapping her arms around herself. "His lawyers are demanding a preliminary hearing on the 4th. He says the deed discrepancy from 1982 voids my claim to the Eastern Ridge." "He's banking on you not having the funds to fight a drawn-out survey battle," I said, taking a slow sip of the coffee. It was black and strong, exactly how I drank it. She had remembered. "He's using paper to create a reality that doesn't exist in the dirt." I set the mug down on a nearby crate and unclipped a waterproof ledger from my belt. I flipped it open, showing her a topographic overlay I had sketched. "Look here. The 1982 deed references a rusted iron pin driven into the bedrock. Sterling's surveyors couldn't find it because there's 3 feet of leaf litter and topsoil over it now. But I know where it is, based on the growth rings of the surrounding cedars." Aurora stepped closer to look at the ledger. I could smell a faint trace of vanilla and old paper, a scent that was entirely her. I kept my posture rigid, ensuring I didn't crowd her space. "You can find the pin?" she asked, looking up at me. "I'm going to dig it up tomorrow morning," I stated. "Once I expose the pin and shoot a laser line straight to the county marker on the road, his entire claim collapses." She looked at the ledger, then back at me. A small, genuine smile touched the corners of her mouth. "You're not just a landscaper anymore, are you, Jackson?" "Landscape architect," I corrected mildly, feeling a small point of pride anchor itself in my chest. "And certified arborist. I know how the earth works, Aurora. Sterling only knows how to pave it." Over the next 2 weeks, the property line became a battlefield of inches and legal notices. Sterling escalated, sending a crew with a backhoe to park aggressively close to the eastern ridge, a silent threat of impending demolition. I didn't argue with them. I didn't yell. I showed up at 6 in the morning with a core sampler and a Leica total station. I spent 4 hours documenting the subsoil compaction, proving that the earth supporting the retaining wall was structurally integrated with the greenhouse foundation. I drafted a 50-page technical report detailing the root preservation zones, citing 3 different municipal codes that Sterling's proposed access road would violate. Every evening before I left, I would stop by the back porch of the main house. Aurora would leave a fresh cup of coffee on the railing, and we would review the day's findings. We didn't sit together. I would stand in the yard, leaning against my truck, and she would stand on the porch, wrapped in a thick cardigan. It was a routine built on distance and respect. I wanted nothing more than to walk up those steps, to sit beside her and pull the weight of the stress from her shoulders. But I knew the rules of my own existence. I was the guy who fixed things. I wasn't the guy who got to stay. If I pushed a boundary, if I made her feel even slightly pressured while she was already fighting a war on her own land, I would lose the only connection to her I had. So I kept my hands in my pockets. I kept my voice calm. I built a fortress of competence around her, hoping it would be enough to make her feel safe. On a Tuesday afternoon, the weather turned violent. A sudden, unseasonable gale swept through the valley, bringing sheets of horizontal rain and howling winds. I was at my office in town reviewing the final draft of the arborist report when my phone buzzed. It was an automated alert from the Weather Service, followed immediately by a text from Aurora. "The wind is catching the loose panes on the west wall of the greenhouse. It sounds like the frame is buckling." I grabbed my keys and my gear bag, sprinting for my truck. I broke 3 minor traffic laws getting to the estate. When I pulled up the gravel drive, the wind was tearing at the trees, sending branches crashing into the dark lawn. I found Aurora inside the greenhouse, struggling to pull a heavy canvas tarp over a row of rare seedlings. The glass above us was shuddering violently, a terrifying rattling sound that echoed in the cavernous space. One of the large upper panes had shattered, letting the storm pour directly inside. "Jackson!" she yelled over the noise, her hair plastered to her face. "Step back!" I ordered, my voice cutting through the panic with sharp authority. I dropped my bag and pulled out a roll of heavy-duty retention tape and a custom-cut sheet of polycarbonate I kept for emergencies. The wind was howling through the broken pane, destabilizing the air pressure inside. If another pane went, the roof could cascade. I climbed the rusted iron ladder attached to the structural supports, the metal slippery under my wet gloves. The wind fought me, trying to tear the polycarbonate sheet from my grip. I braced my boots against a crossbeam, locking my knees, and muscled the sheet over the jagged hole. I slammed my hand against the plastic, pinning it to the frame, and ripped a long strip of retention tape with my teeth. I worked with frantic precision, sealing the edges, forcing the structural integrity back into the frame. The roaring sound of the wind was instantly muffled, the pressure stabilizing. I climbed down the ladder, my chest heaving, rain dripping from my jaw. Aurora was standing near the potting bench, her hands trembling as she held the edge of the wood. I walked over to her, pulling off my wet gloves. "It's sealed," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "It will hold through the night. I'll bring a glazier out tomorrow to replace the glass." She looked at the patched roof, then at me. Without a word, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around my torso, pressing her face against my wet chest. I froze. Every muscle in my body locked. I didn't reach around her. I didn't pull her closer. I stood perfectly still, letting her use me as a physical anchor against the chaos of the storm. The sudden stillness that settled over me was absolute. The howling wind outside faded into nothing. The only reality was the steadying pressure of her arms and the quiet transfer of stability between us. I was her shield, and in that moment, that was all I needed to be. When she finally stepped back, she looked down, a flush of color hitting her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she murmured. I thought I was going to lose it all." "You're not going to lose it," I stated, my voice rough. "I've got the iron pin documented. The report is finished. We file it with the county clerk tomorrow morning. Sterling is done." The following morning, we stood in the fluorescent-lit hallway of the county courthouse. Aurora was wearing a sharp, tailored navy suit, looking every bit the formidable owner of a historic estate. I wore my best dark jeans and a clean button-down work shirt. I wasn't going to pretend to be a lawyer. I was exactly what the report required, an expert witness in the dirt. Sterling arrived with a junior attorney trailing behind him. He was a man who wore expensive suits poorly, his arrogance preceding him like a bad cologne. He sneered when he saw me standing next to Aurora. "Ms. Evans," Sterling said smoothly, "I hope you've come to sign the easement agreement. It would save us all a lot of unnecessary legal fees." Aurora didn't flinch. She stood her ground, her chin raised. Before she could speak, I stepped forward, holding a thick, bound document. "There won't be an easement," I said, my voice projecting clearly down the quiet hallway. "Because you don't own the ridge." Sterling scoffed. "And who are you, the gardener?" "I'm the certified arborist and licensed landscape architect who just filed a 70-page technical survey with the county clerk," I replied, my tone flat, stripping away any room for argument. I handed a copy of the report to his attorney. "Page 12 contains the GPS coordinates and photographic evidence of the original 1982 iron surveyor's pin, which was buried under 3 feet of topsoil on what you claim is your land. Page 24 details the root preservation zone of the heritage oak, a protected county landmark. If your backhoe so much as scrapes a surface root within a 50-foot radius, you will be in violation of Title 14 of the Environmental Code, resulting in a mandatory stop work order on your entire development." The junior attorney scanned the pages rapidly, his face draining of color. He whispered something to Sterling, pointing to the photographs of the exposed iron pin and the laser line survey map. Sterling's face tightened. He looked at the report, then at me, realizing he had walked into a wall he couldn't buy his way through. I hadn't argued with him. I hadn't raised my voice. I had simply dismantled his leverage with undeniable, measurable reality. "This is a technicality," Sterling spat, though the bluster was gone. "It's the law," Aurora said, her voice ringing with clear, calm authority. She stepped up beside me, her presence a definitive boundary line. "My lawyer will be sending a formal cease and desist this afternoon. If your crew steps foot within 50 feet of my greenhouse, I will have them arrested for trespassing." She didn't look at Sterling for another second. She turned to me. "Are we finished here, Jackson?" "We're finished," I confirmed. We walked out of the courthouse together, leaving Sterling staring at the paperwork that had just cost him his access road. When we reached the parking lot, the autumn sun was finally breaking through the clouds, casting long, golden shadows across the pavement. Aurora stopped next to my truck. She looked down at her hands, taking a slow, deep breath, then looked up at me. "You saved my home," she said, her voice thick with an emotion she was refusing to let spill over. "I don't know how to repay you for the hours you put into this." "You don't owe me anything, Aurora," I said immediately. The thought of her treating this as a transaction made my chest tight. "I did it because it needed to be done. I did it because—" I cut myself off. I swallowed the words because I couldn't stand seeing you in pain. Instead, I offered a practical truth. Because I respect the history of that land. She looked at me, a long, searching gaze that made me feel entirely transparent. She reached into her purse and pulled out a heavy antique brass key. "The lock on the main gate," she said quietly. "I had it rekeyed this morning." She held it out to me. I stared at the key. It wasn't payment, it was access. It was a permanent invitation. "Aurora, I can't." "Jackson," she interrupted gently, stepping into my space. The scent of vanilla and old paper wrapped around me. She reached out, taking my rough, calloused hand, and pressed the cold brass key into my palm. Her fingers closed over mine, a deliberate, grounding touch. The transfer of stability went both ways this time. The world stopped spinning. "I'm not asking you to be the landscaper," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper meant only for me. "I'm asking you to stay." I looked down at our joined hands, then up into her eyes. The unworthiness, the fear of being out of place, fractured and dissolved under the steady certainty of her gaze. I didn't need to shrink myself. I didn't need to hide behind tools and reports anymore. I closed my hand around the key. "I'm staying." I leaned in, closing the final few inches between us. The kiss wasn't frantic or desperate, it was an arrival. It was the heavy, grounding sensation of a ship dropping anchor in a safe harbor. It was a promise, sealed without words, a finality that settled deep into my bones. The fighting was over. I was home. Closing thoughts. I learned that true worth isn't defined by the dirt on your boots or the title on your door. It's proven by how steadily you stand when the people you care about are under fire. Real love isn't about grand, dramatic rescues. It's about consistency, safety, and choosing to show up day after day with the right tools for the job. Please like and subscribe so we can share more stories like this.